Commitments are important because whatever He tells us to do, we should be doing quickly.
Amen.
The things He y'all were a little slow there. I had to wait for you to catch up. The things that He asked us to do. You know, the thing about Jesus, remember when we talked about whatever He asks us to do, He also empowers us to do. So whenever you say you can't, I can't do that. I'm like, you're right, you can't. But with God,
Amen.
all things are possible. So what is impossible in and of yourself, God can make possible when you quit trying to rely on yourself and you allow Him to work through you.
Yes.
And that's why we have to make sure we're listening to what He has to say. So one of the things we have to look at, let's look in Luke's Gospel, the 10th chapter. This is the verse that we talked about. We're going to look at a couple of different ones. Luke 10:29. If you remember, we talked about that just a little bit last week. But the lawyer who stood up and tried to test Jesus, asking which of the law was best, begins to talk to us in verse 29. But he, the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" The lawyer says to Jesus, they already asked him, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus gave him an answer, but he didn't like the answer. Because the answer is love God with all, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So now he's got to figure out, okay, I got you. Who's my neighbor? Now in the country, anybody you ever see is your neighbor. In the city, your neighbor is the person on either side of you that you talk to.
Right.
So if you don't talk to them, they're not your neighbor. But Jesus comes by and He responds. Because again, I want us to see this. The attorney, the lawyer, is trying to justify himself. Which means, as soon as he was confronted with the command of Christ, it brought into his mind the people he was not being neighborly to. It brought to his mind the things where he was falling short on loving his neighbor as himself. So now he's got to justify why he's not treating everybody the way he should. Y'all look at me like you understand it, right? So he begins to try to figure out a way to do that. So he asks, who is my neighbor? Which also has a bad premise, because really what he's asking is, who can I not be nice to? Who is it that I'm allowed to be mean to? Who is it that I can mistreat? Who is it that I can walk past and pretend like they don't bother me? Who is it that I don't have to share the love of God with? Who is it that I don't have to share the gospel with? That's what he's really asking. He's cloaked it on who is my neighbor, but the premise is love your neighbor as yourself. Well then, if they're not my neighbor, then that gives me the freedom not to love them. That's the logical progression that's taking place here. We see it also in other places. Remember where Jesus says, if you're nice to people who are nice to you, what's the big rub?
Yeah.
I was kind of looking through some of the stuff I wrote recently, and a few weeks ago, I mean, I really don't remember when I wrote it, but I wrote it, that said, you never need grace for people who look like you, act like you, or think like you. You only need grace for people who don't think like you, don't act like you, or don't look like you. That's where you need grace. If you're a U of L fan, you don't need grace until you run into a UK fan.
Right.
You don't. Because if all you know are U of L fans, then you don't have to have any grace, because you think your team's the greatest. When you run into somebody who likes somebody else, then you've got to figure out whether or not you're going to have grace. Now that's in one area. I'll use another area that's more churchy. If you're a hymn fan, Hymn,
Yeah.
not a hymn, but I mean hymn, blessed, the hymn fan, you don't need grace if you're surrounded by people who are hymn fans. But God help you if you run into one of those new chorus singing fans. You know the one, 7-11 songs, 7 words 11 times. They just keep saying the same word over and over and over again. And you're like, oh my God, if they sing it again, I'll go to the altar and get saved. Just please stop. That's kind of how I used to feel about Just As I Am. I was like, okay, you go first. There's 7 verses. We'll all spread it out. So by the time we get to the 7th person there, he'll think we've done something. Well, which I think is hysterical. Just as I am without one plea. And then we plead the whole time. We never show up. How could you sing it? It just almost seems contradictory. So, y'all pray for me. That's the way my mind thinks. But if you're a hymn fan, and then you get around people who are chorus singing people, you need grace. Because when you start singing hymns, they're like, there's too many words. You do understand that was one of the complaints about hymns when they first came out. There's too many words, we can't learn them. You do understand that the other complaint they had was because most of the hymns were written to bar songs, that they were too secular and they couldn't lift up Jesus because those are popular songs, popular hymns, popular bar songs. The music was kind of like we used to do with Amazing Grace. You remember when the Coke song was out? I'd like to buy the world a Coke to keep it company. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but all we did was just the Coke song. Put Amazing Grace to it. If you go hear Southern gospel groups or popular groups, guess what they'll do to Amazing Grace or Blessed Assurance? They'll take it and they'll put it to the Beach Boys. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, and they'll do it to the Beach Boys, it's just, and yet people freak out, oh my gosh, that's so sacrilegious. No, they need grace. You don't need grace when everybody looks just like you, acts like you, thinks like you, and talks like you. Or when you come to church and somebody comes in and they don't look right, act right. I have issues. Al knows I have issues. I have issues. Don't wear a hat in church if you're a guy. I don't like wearing hats in church if you're a guy. Why don't I like wearing hats in church? Because you weren't allowed to wear a hat inside my house. Period. Once you stepped inside, I never was in the military, but I could have fit in the military because you don't wear your hat when you're in the military when you come inside. So, but over the years of pastoring, I've had give a lot of grace to people who wear their hats inside. I got a guy that I know that is a cowboy. So that means none of you all know him. I got a guy who is a cowboy friend of mine who he took his line from Smokey and the Bandit.
Oh my.
If you all remember watching that movie Smokey and the Bandit, Burt Reynolds said, I'm going to take my hat off for 2 reasons. And that's the same reason this guy did. I mean, unless he was taking a shower, his hat was on. I mean, he wore the hat in the church, and it used to drive me nuts. And so I went to him one day, and I was like, why are you wearing your hat? It's killing me. Now stop. He needed grace. His hat should have no effect on my worship. But I was so consumed with his hat because all I saw was a hat, and I was missing God. How many times do we not give grace to people because we see their hat and we don't see God? We see their thing that drives us nuts. I have problems, you all know that. I forget to smile sometimes. I know y'all find that hard to believe. But I get caught up in thinking. And when I start thinking, I have a tendency to space out a little bit. Yep. I know what's going on, but I forget to smile. So my face looks like this. And if you don't know me, you're going to think, ooh, he's mad. I had somebody who used to sing at different churches. Y'all relax. I always use examples from someplace else unless I name them. So this person would sing or would lead worship, and then they would come to me when church is over, and they were like, Pastor, I don't understand. What did I do that was so wrong? I said, no, you did a great job. And they're like, well, you just look so mad. I'm like, when did I look mad? You know, when did I look mad? When did I look mad? I don't remember looking mad. When did I look mad? And they're like, when I was singing, I said, well, didn't you hear the fact that the sound was off? Couldn't you hear? It was driving me nuts. Because sometimes I'll hear when it's not quite right, and it's driving me bananas. Because I'm like, all I want to do is stand up and scream at the sound person, can't you hear that? Which, you know, just me. I'm always amazed at folks who sign up for sound, but they can't hear anything. I want to throw stuff at them. So I'm sitting there, and they're like, well, you know, you're making me self-conscious. And then I had to start thinking, smile. You know, now, why? This person's trying to minister, but my face is stopping them from seeing God. So the attorney comes to him and says, if I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, who's my neighbor? Who do I have to show grace to? Because it's easy to show grace to everybody who thinks like me. It is hard to show grace to people who don't. My wife and I don't think alike. We don't. One of the reasons I know that God meant for men and women to be married to each other and not men and not women is because when two men are together or two women are together, they think alike. Most men think the same. You can go to most men, and I'm not saying all, but you can go to most men and say something. Hey, what's going on? And he says nothing. You know what he means? Nothing. Ain't nothing going on. I'm good. What are you thinking about? Nothing. You know what he means? Nothing. Go ask a woman. Because so here's this. When a guy says, what's wrong? And she says nothing. You know what he hears?
Everything.
Nothing. So he walks out going, nothing's wrong. I asked her. Surely she would be honest with me. And she would tell me if something was wrong. Because if Mark came to me and said, Pastor, what's wrong? I'd be like, I can tell you. We would understand that. So when you tell him nothing's wrong and he walks away, now you're fuming. Not you specifically, but you in a generic sense of the female gender. All of you all are fuming because you're thinking everything is wrong. If you have to ask what's wrong, you don't even care enough to pay attention to know why I'm mad.
Exactly.
And women understand that. So you get two women in the same house, they can communicate with each other without saying anything because they're the same. Men are the same. But now hear this. God has designed us to be different. Here's proof. Because the marriage on earth is similar to marriage in heaven. It is symbolic of what's in heaven. And in heaven, one of us cannot be interchanged.
Yep.
God has got to be himself as the groom. And he cannot be interchanged. So on earth, you can't swap partners like you swap phone things. No. Because they are designed for a purpose. So it is also the opportunity to extend grace to people because when you don't know how the other person is thinking or trying to understand them, you have to give grace to one another. You don't need grace if you all think alike. You don't need grace if you're all the same. So how are you going to show the love of God to somebody who's on your last good nerve? If you only give grace to people who are just like you. Trying to justify himself, he comes to Jesus and asks, who's my neighbor? Help me limit my neighborhood. Won't you be?
My neighbor.
You know, let me begin to figure out who I can push off on the other side so that I don't have to deal with these kind of issues. I don't want to have to deal with these kind of problems. I don't want to have to deal with these kind of struggles. I want to push them off. And so Jesus responds in verse 30, and he says to him, and he tells him a story of a certain man from Jerusalem fell among thieves who stripped him of clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, I got to stop right there. Because if I ask you who my neighbor is, why are you telling me a story about some guy that got beat up? The Jewish teaching is, let me tell you a story, and then you're going to answer your own question. So he comes along, and you all know the story, how the guy gets beat up. Then Jesus says this, now by chance a certain priest came down the road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked, passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. When he saw him, he had compassion on him. And he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, whatever more you spend, when I come back, I'll repay you. Which of these 3 was a neighbor to him who fell among thieves? And the guy responds, well, the one that showed mercy. And then he says, go and do likewise. So I want you to see some stuff here. I mean, just very quickly in teaching. Jesus says, what I want you to do, the demand is, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the demand. We talked last week about the law of the prophets. That's how you fulfill the law of the prophets. How hanging a picture. You can't get on all law, can't get on all prophets. You got to have the balance between the two. Old Testament, New Testament. Talk about that. I'm not going to go through all that again. But he says, I want you to love your neighbor. What he's telling us is, this is a radical command and a radical provision. It doesn't make sense. Why do I got to stop and take care of him? It ain't my fault he got beat up. He probably deserved it. Ain't my fault he's homeless. He's probably a drug addict. Ain't my fault he's homeless. He's probably an alcoholic. I have seen a sign when I was in Denver. Give me money for beer. Hey, at least I'm honest. I thought it was funny. So what he's trying to show us here is, he says, I want you to see this. The priest, the person you think, remember the command, love God with all, and your neighbor as yourself. The priest comes by. Surely the priest loves God. But the priest walked by. This godly person walks past the guy who's beat up. I've heard all kinds of good stories on why. Ooh, I can't touch him because if I get blood on me, then I can't go be a priest. If I do this, I've heard all kinds of great stuff. Jesus doesn't say that in Matthew's gospel. He just says he walked by. Mm-hmm. It could have been for some of those reasons. It could have been because, I ain't got time. It could have been, maybe the guy that got beat up wasn't a Jew. Maybe he wasn't one of the guys in his congregation. Maybe it was one of those kids that made fun of him. Maybe it was a gay person. Maybe it was a drug addict. Maybe it was somebody he knew to be nefarious. We don't know why he walked by. The point is, he walked by. A priest who loves God for part of the first commandment, but the second is likened to it, the opposite side of the coin, love your neighbor as yourselves. You can't tell me how much you love God if you don't care about your neighbor. Now, don't misunderstand me. You can't tell me how much you care about your neighbor and then violate God too at the same time. They are two sides of the same coin. You don't get to pick and choose which side you land on.
Amen.
So you got to do both. If somebody gives me, I didn't bring any coins. You got a coin? I got a coin. Let me borrow a coin. Let me see what kind of coin you have. Oh, he's got a quarter. I'm going to borrow your quarter. I'm going to give it right back to you. Okay? He gave me a quarter. You know how I know it's a quarter? Because on one side it has an eagle, and the other side it has George Washington. If he'd given me a state quarter, the back side would have had a state. But this is a quarter. Now, if I got a quarter from him, and all it had was an eagle on this side and the eagle on the other side, I'd have been like, I don't know what I got.
You got good money.
If I got a head on one side and a head on the other side, you know what I'd have got? I'd have got a great opportunity to make some money. Give me $1 every time. I could make it come on heads every time. But you know what I wouldn't have? I wouldn't have a quarter. The way I know I got a quarter is each side is stamped distinctly to recognize what it is. So when somebody comes to me and says, what's the greatest commandment? Love God with all and your neighbor as yourself. So when I talk to people out in the world who don't love Jesus and they're like, you need to love your neighbor, I said, but you got to love God. In other words, you can't pick what side you want and call it a quarter. It takes the whole thing to be a quarter. Amen. So the priest walks by. The Levite, I mean, you know, upper echelon of society. I mean, you know, he's in the right tribe and everything, and he walks by. Then the Samaritan shows up. Thank you. Then a Samaritan shows up. Now the lawyer is a Jew talking to Jesus, who's a Jew, and they don't like Samaritans because a Samaritan was a half-breed. Like the song that Cher sang. Y'all know the song that Cher sang? Y'all can YouTube it. So the thing is it was a half-breed. They were not really all Jewish, and yet they were something else, and then they worshipped in the wrong place, and they did all these things that Jews thought made them inferior. Have you ever, don't answer, looked at somebody and felt like they were inferior, or they were different than the way you are? I told you that Toshi and I think differently. We'll meet people, and I'll get done walking out, and she'll say, so what about him? I said, well, his name was Bill. Was he married? I don't know. Does he have kids? I don't know. Well, where does he work at? I said, I don't know. I said, we never talked about those things. My wife is relational. When she meets people, when she walks out, she can tell you their life story. I meet people, and I can tell you I met them.
That's me.
Now, does that make me right and her wrong? No, we're different. We function differently. We think differently. How we respond to stuff is differently. You know, my wife's got a really big temper and a short fuse. It don't take much to get her mad. You know, she has no problem getting mad. Now, she'll make up with you real quick. I got a big temper and a long fuse. And if I get mad at you, we might make up. But I got to pray through some stuff first. I'm not the guy that's going to just blow up at you and call you names and fight with you and then go have a cup of coffee. No, if I ever get to the point that I'm mad at you, I'm going to be mad at you for a minute. Now, I'm not saying I'm right, because I'm not. I'm just telling you that's me. I have to work through it. So God continually puts me around people that are making me mad. So I watch my wife do it, and I'm learning how she does that. And so I'm incorporating it. The sad part is she's around me enough that she's incorporating the other side. And so it's taken her a little bit longer to get aggravated. You know, it takes me a little bit. So I'm saying this because Samaritans didn't think like the Jews, didn't feel like the Jews. So when Jesus tells a story that the Samaritan was a merciful one, notice what the guy says. Jesus goes, which one of these, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, was the neighbor? And the guy responds, the one who showed mercy. He wouldn't even say the Samaritan. Right. He says the one who showed mercy. How bigoted are you that you can't even acknowledge the very thing that he's trying to show you? The one that showed mercy, he says, then you go be that kind of a neighbor. Be radical in your faith. Be radical in how you do stuff. Be radical in your provision. Loving God will sustain you through all the joys and the pains and perplexities and uncertainty of loving a neighbor. Because when you love somebody, it'll get on your nerve. Hey, y'all gonna look at me like y'all ain't gonna tell the truth. Only person who told the truth, Judy shook her head yes, because Chuck wasn't here. But the fact of the matter is, if you love somebody, there are times where you will ask yourself, I am not sure why I love you. You will look them right in the eye and say, baby, there ain't nobody I love more than you, and nobody else I've ever wanted to kill. I'm just saying, at the same time, there's a perplexity that occurs, and yet what sustains you is your love for God allows me to continue to show love to people who are sometimes getting on your nerve and who are driving you nuts. That's what God wants you to do. And by this, people will know you're His disciple by your love for one another. Could it be that part of the reason we struggle witnessing to people in the church, outside the church, is because people in the church don't show love to people in the church?
Yes, that's the truth.
So we get outside the church, and my wife and I talked today, we were at someplace. Where'd we go? We went to Raffles today for lunch. Took out for lunch because tonight is Cheerios. So we went out for a nice dinner tonight, our lunch, so we could sit down and have something, a few moments of solitude and quietness in the middle of our day, and have a nice meal in the sense of vegetables, the whole bit. And so we're sitting here and we're talking about stuff, and we're talking about how people got to be careful because we're both realtors, and in realtors, one of the struggles is you can't badmouth another realtor. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in a restaurant and I've heard two realtors having a conversation about a third realtor who's not there, and they're just having a conversation. But have you ever sat in a restaurant and listened to somebody else's conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you never heard somebody else's conversation at a restaurant.
Good hearing anyway.
When you had good hearing, you're going to tell me you never went to a restaurant. Jeannie, you're a saint then, because the rest of us have eavesdropped like a dog.
Yep.
Al, I know you have, because I've seen you walk by. Pray God, I'll pay you right now. Goodness, that's just, I tell folks all the time, Al says, I can't hear. I said, unless I whisper.
Yeah.
The more I whisper, the more Al hears. I tease him like that. I ain't sat in a restaurant and stayed longer than I meant to stay just to hear the end of the conversation. Because I'm like, y'all got to be kidding. So, it's the same as phone conversations. You heard him on the phone. I keep telling my wife, you do not have to yell to be heard. It's a phone. Hello? Y'all ever the phone rings? Hello? How you getting the phone? Why are you yelling? It's on the phone. You don't have to scream to be heard. And yet they get on the phone and they want to yell.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm not wearing my guy out. So we see so we have when we love one another. Could it be that sometimes we go to restaurants and we're talking bad about the preacher, we're talking bad about the music, talking bad about people in the church, the choir directors, the ushers, the cleaner, the nursery person, and we're talking bad, and we're wondering how come it is when we invite folk to church that they don't want to come.
Exactly.
Have you ever heard because people in the church have been hypocrites?
Yep.
Why would they say that? Could it be our actions outside the church or override what we say happens in the church? And here's how they'll know you're my disciples. Your love for one another. Let me prove it to you. Who was with Peter after he denied Christ? John the beloved. John understood the love of Christ. So when Peter is down on himself, it's easy to pile on when somebody's down. But John was the one who says, I'm going to hang out with you, Peter, because I know you better than that.
That's right.
I know you better. Yeah, you screwed up. Whatever. Let's go on. Get up. How long are you going to stay down? Get up. You messed up. Playing golf, it's one of the things. You hit a bad shot. Well, how many bad shots are you going to hit before you forget it? You can't go back and unhit the shot you shot. Let it go. You threw a gutter ball. How many gutter balls are you going to throw before you realize I don't have to throw it in the gutter? Okay, you threw one in the gutter. Great. You threw one in the gutter. It doesn't mean you got to throw every one in the gutter. So go ahead and begin to share the love of God so that people will freak out and wonder, what's wrong with you? Why are you so loving? Because when I think about the sacrifice that I received from Jesus, it requires me to give sacrifice to others. When I think about the grace that I've received from Christ, then I have to give you grace. I know you like country music. That's okay. I still love you. Yeah. You can like Luke Bryan. You can like Luke Brown. And now I saw some David Allen Coe. You can like George No-Show Jones. You can like Bo Cephas, also known Hank Jr. You might even like Hank. I got a hot rod Ford and a $2 bill, and I know a spot right over the hill. Hey, hey, good looking. I mean, whatever. You may like Hank. That's all right. Love you some Hank. You may be like Joey and like stuff that you can't repeat in public. And be a headbanger and be into that, round and round. Whatever. That's cool. You can like rap like Mark. You look at Mark, you're like, Mark's going to be a country guy. Mark's not. Mark's a hairband guy from the 80s. He likes Poison. He likes guys that wear makeup. That's okay. He's the only person that's going to go to the Skinner concert because my wife doesn't like Skinner. So we're gonna go and enjoy ourselves. I'm just saying that's maybe where you're at. That's called grace. I can love you though it may not be my cup of tea.
That's right.
Or you may not fit with my personality. I may not fit with all your other issues. We can still show grace to people. It is a radical command and a radical provision. So the key we have to watch out for is what Jesus is saying is, don't limit your neighbor. Expand your horizons on who your neighbor is. The parable of the Good Samaritan changes the paradigm from who has the status to be worthy of love. Is this person worthy of love? See, if you walk by and you see Bill Gates beat up on the side of the road, you're going to help him. I don't know if y'all know this. I thought it was kind of funny. I was reading something a few weeks ago this year. It actually was this summer, so it's been in the last 3 months I've read this. About this guy who goes into a coffee shop to get a cup of coffee, and he doesn't have his wallet with him. So this lady buys him a cup of coffee. It's Keith Urban.
Oh, yeah, I heard that.
Keith Urban is a multi-millionaire. He got money is not his problem. But he walked out without any money. He went to get a cup of coffee. This lady had no idea who he was. I'll get this bum a cup of coffee. I'll pick up his coffee today. And comes to find out it's Keith Urban, multi-million-dollar Urban. And I don't know what he did to repay her, but I'm sure he paid her back for a cup of coffee. But just having that story is like so cool. Because if I would have known it was Keith Urban, I'd have paid for his coffee.
Yeah.
If I'd have known it was Simon Cowell, I'd have paid for his coffee. If I'd have known it was Billy Graham, I'd have paid for his coffee. If I'd have known it was Bishop Jakes, I'd have paid for his coffee. If I'd have known it was Donald Trump, I'd have paid for his coffee. If I'd have known it was Obama, he didn't buy his own coffee.
No.
I'm just saying. So the thing is the paradigm changes. Instead of saying, who got beat up? What can I get for my time? What can I get? If I get dirty, what am I going to get reimbursed about? Am I going to get some kind of special status? No, the paradigm changes. Because now no longer is it that person who can help you. The paradigm shifts to where it's now, can I be the kind of person who gives compassion disregard of the status? Can I be the kind of person who shows mercy to somebody who cannot give mercy back? Can I be the kind of person, I've said it for years. I've been in church too long. We've got single parents who come to church and they have their kids, and then we get mad because their kids cry. They're a single parent. Why are we getting mad because their kids cry?
That's right.
Well, they should take them out. No, they should not take them out. They're the ones who need somebody to grab the kid and take them out so they can stay and hear the word of God to have their life changed.
Amen.
We need somebody to take them out. That part we all agree with. But we shouldn't punish the person who's coming in. I look at people all the time. I had one lady who came to church, and every time she came, she used to take a good beating every time she came to church. But she came all the time. Her husband just didn't want her to come. And so she went through verbal abuse, went through physical abuse. And sometimes when she came, she didn't always look good. I told you about the lady who had a fear of water, and when she came to church, she smelled. We weren't very loving to her because of all the things that were going on in her world that we weren't even aware of. So are we looking for people who can give us status? Or are we like the Good Samaritan who says, I'm not looking for who can give me status back. I want to be the kind of person that can give love to people regardless of their status.
Yep.
I want to be the kind of person that gives love to people despite how they treat. I had a guy ask me today if I was in the military. But I get asked that on average once or twice a week. Mainly because I was raised with manners. I used to think it's because I had a short haircut. Then I realized it wasn't. I get asked if I'm in the military because when I talk to people, I say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. In fact, last Sunday when I was taking my class, the dance scuba class, my trainer goes, my name's Dan. I said, yes, sir, Dan, I understand. I fully understand Dan is your first name, and I can call you Dan at any given point, and that is wonderful. However, sir, I will still call you sir because that is a polite thing to say to you. That's just, for me, it's just the way I was raised. It's just what I believe to be true. So folks ask me all the time, were you in the military? No, sir. Why do you ask? I used to think, again, now I know, because I say yes, sir, no, sir. It blows their mind. Because most people today say, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
What? Huh? All right, whatever. So because you're treating someone with respect, I've also treated people with respect. And my wife, who you all know has a temper at times, I was treating one person with respect who was extremely rude. Extremely rude. And I said, I understand, sir, what you're saying. However, there's not much I can do about the situation. Yes, sir, I understand that. Yes, sir. Why are you calling him sir? He's being a jerk. And I put the phone on mute while he was still ranting and raving. And I said, how he treats me is a reflection of him. How I treat him is a reflection of me. I'm not going to let how he treats me dictate how I treat him. I'm going to treat him with grace. I'm going to treat him with respect. Not because he's right, not because I think he deserves it, because it's a right thing to do. Yes, sir. No, sir. And at the end of the transaction, did he love me anymore?
No.
Not at all. He gave me my lowest score ever. He gave me a 7 out of 10. I wanted to break my foot off in his head. Never said a word. Because here's what I know. It doesn't matter how you act. It matters how I act. See, if I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, then how I treat you is how I want to be treated. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't wait till they start treating you the way you want to be treated, then respond in kind, because even sinners and hypocrites and charlatans do that. No. Be the leader that sets the example. It says, I'm going to show love to you and mercy to you and grace to you, and it doesn't matter. I used to have a friend of mine that said this all the time, and I changed it. He used to come to me, we talk, and he'd always say this. He was a state overseer of a particular area, and he said, I'll be your friend if you let me. I'll be your friend if you let me. I changed it. I said, I'm going to be your friend whether you like it or not.
Yep.
I'm going to be your friend whether you like it or not. So I go to people, and my mentality is, I'm going to be your friend. Now, you may or may not like I'm your friend, but I've already made the decision to be your friend. So you might as well get on board. But if you don't get on board, I'm still going to be your friend. That is loving your neighbor as yourself. That is what Christ is he is demanding of us, is that we do this. He's saying with this whole parable, the changes, it's not about the other people. It's God changed me so I become a person of mercy. Jesus does not answer the specific question who your neighbor is, because Jesus doesn't like carving humanity into groups. You're worthy to love, but you're not worthy to love. You're respectable, you're not respectable. you're okay. Well, we're not sure about you. You're in the wait and see group. No, Jesus doesn't carve everybody up into different groups. He says, go be the kind of person who shows compassion. Here's what he's really saying. Go get a compassionate heart that shows mercy to the people who need it. Notice what he did. He went over, he bound up his wounds. You really can't take somebody to the end to recover until you get their wounds taken care of first. When you pull up to an accident, the first thing you want to find out is who's bleeding and how bad. Because you can bleed to death quicker than just about anything else. So when you get there, if somebody's bleeding, you want to figure out where they're bleeding from and stop the bleeding as quickly as possible. But their leg is broke. Their leg can be broke. I don't care. I'm going to stop the bleeding first. Mm-hmm. We have to heal their wounds. Why is it in church that we struggle so much helping people heal their wounds? I can answer the question because it wasn't rhetorical. Because we don't care where they're bleeding from. We want them to be involved someplace. And they may need to heal first. You may find out, well, I'll look at them. Well, look at Mark. Look at Mark. I'm using him as an example because, Joey, it's your week off. So, I took off last Sunday. It's your week today. So, look at Mark. I'm telling you, right? I mean, Mark only comes to church, every other Sunday. And so you have an attitude, not knowing he works every other Sunday. So you're mad about the fact that he's working. You're mad because of this issue. Well, he was gone for a couple of weeks. Yeah, he was stuck in the hospital taking care of his wife who had some health issues. Well, I didn't know that. Yeah, so get off your high horse. Amen. Well, how come you didn't tell me? Because I didn't know I was supposed to be a newscaster. My name is not Walter Cronkite. I am not Tom Brokenjaw or Dan Bradley. I'm just saying, I'm none of those people. I'm none of them. It's not my job to go tell you. But Pastor, why didn't you tell me? He never told me to tell you. I didn't realize I had to call you with everything. I didn't realize your name was Jesus. I call on Jesus with everything. I call you when I need something. Well, Pastor, that's just rude. No, that's life. Rude is putting your nose. Come on, Pinky. Putting your nose where it don't belong. I better quit pretty quick. I'll be in trouble. You see, when you understand it, when Jesus says, go be the kind of person that gets a compassionate heart, that has love for people, and says, I want to find out where you're bleeding from, and I want to heal your bleeding. Now, here's what I've also learned. Once you start grabbing somebody where they hurt, they're never happy about it. I told you, the doctor, when I got bit, had a little bitty pussy thing right there. And she walked over and she goes, is that where it hurts? And squeezed my hand. I said, yes, it is. But before you grab that again, you better tell me. I don't mind you grabbing it. I understand what you're doing. But you got to give me a warning. Because I got to brace myself. I got to prepare my mind for the pain I'm about ready to receive. You just can't surprise pain healer on me. You got to give me a warning. So when you go up to somebody and you're getting ready to apply the love of God, you better give them a warning about what you're getting ready to apply, because they might fight back. Mm-hmm. Oh, I know my time is. I got to hurry. I'm going to get through this point if it kills me. Taking my scuba class. I'm not doing my this class. This is the rescue class. But in the rescue class, they teach you that you better learn how to swim a lot better than you swim right now. And you better be able to endure some pain. Because they're going to put you in a high pressure situation. They're going to have somebody, their job is to panic. Now I'm telling you right now, I'm good at panicking. And you're going to go over there and help that person who's panicking get out of the water. That is a good way to get hurt. Guy was telling me, he goes, last week's class, he goes, I had 2 people quit in the middle of the class. I said, what happened? He said, we had this one girl who was panicking, and they went over, and she liked to beat them to death. And they got mad and swam away and said, I quit. Because she literally almost beat them to death. She was panicking, and she was grabbing stuff and slapping stuff. You know why? Because when you can't breathe, you'll grab anything.
That's right.
When you're drowning, you'll grab anything. So before you walk over there, you better have a plan on what you're going to do, because once you start trying to heal what's hurt, you better be able to swim. You better be able to take a punch. You better be able to endure some pain. Because I've gone to people who are hurting, and I'm trying to stop some bleeding, and I've been cussed at, I've been yelled at, I've been lied on, I've been kicked, I've been cheated, I've been told all kinds of false rumors. I don't care. I'm going to stop the pain. I can't let all that stuff worry me. We got to get your bleeding stopped, because I can't get you healed if I keep let that ooze stuff come out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Takes time. But that's a person who has compassion. See, compassion is not just sitting down and crying with them. Compassion, when you bandage the wounds, when you pour on oil and wine, when you put them on your own animal, and you pay for their recovery. I don't have time to break those 4 things down. Compassion is not sitting down and crying with them. The guy didn't even stay with him. Because I hear that all the time. Pastor, you're not compassionate. Why? Well, I mean, I was going through all this, and you acted like you didn't care. I gave you what you needed to stop the bleeding. I poured oil and water and wine on you. I took you to a place of healing, and I paid for your healing. The fact that you didn't like the fact that I didn't sit there and stare at you the whole time, that ain't my problem. You don't need me to stare at you. I had folks get mad at me in the hospital. You didn't stay. I didn't need to. You were in ICU. That means you had one nurse looking at you the whole time. You know what I was going to do if something happened? I was going to say, nurse, come in here. She was already there. So I'm going to pray for you. And I can pray for you from anywhere. I don't have to look at you to pray for you. I'm just being honest, guys. This is the part that we're missing. We got to help people heal. That means we got to be close enough to help them, but we ain't got to stay there the whole time. I got to hurry. I'm going to get out of here. So here's the thing. So how do we see this? A compassionate heart is the promise of the new covenant. Ezekiel 36:26. I will take out of you a stony heart, and I'll put in a heart of flesh. That's the promise of the new covenant. Well, how come I don't have that? Maybe you haven't gotten healed yet. You haven't taken the time to allow recovery to occur so that you can help somebody else. How do I see this? I see this in the death of Jesus. He is the purchaser of our salvation. He's also the pattern by which we live. On the one hand, the death of Jesus models how we should love. And on the other hand, it enables us to love. How did he love? He gave up his life. How do we love? We give up our lives. Give up our life. Well, I can't do that. That's why you got to have him enable you. He's the pattern. Here's the thing we fail to recognize sometimes, especially in Pentecostal churches. Before the resurrection and Pentecost, there's a Gethsemane and a Calvary. Gethsemane is where you pray for the complete healing and strength you need in your life so that you can endure the Calvary, so you can celebrate the resurrection and rejoice by expanding on Pentecost. Amen. But if you jump to Pentecost too quick and you didn't do enough time and you didn't pray all night in Gethsemane, you were one of the disciples that fell asleep, then don't be surprised when you find yourself denying Jesus by the fire pit of a young girl. I'm working on my smile. It's our time in Gethsemane that we pray all night. Not my will, but thy will be done. Lord, if it be your will, however you want to do it. Whatever you want to do, God, if you can use me, or the song that Ron Canola used to sing, if you can use me, Lord, use me, I'll be your hand. use my hands, use my feet. That song, that was our prayer. God, use my hands, use my feet, whatever you need me to, Lord. Then he takes you to Calvary, and you're like, wait a minute, Lord, let me go back to Gethsemane one more time, because maybe I didn't clarify myself. I want you to use my hands and feet on the beach.
Yeah.
No, we get to Calvary, we have to give up ourselves. But you know what? You'll never enjoy a resurrection if you haven't died yet.
That's right. Wow. Awesome.
Jesus shows us this. Love like Jesus is the badge of belonging to the new people that he's gathering to himself. When I get to love like he does. And Jesus loved us perfectly. So when Jesus died on the cross, he demonstrated his love by fulfilling the demands of the Father. And the same thing happens with us. We fulfill the demands of the Father when we love like Jesus did, even to our death. It may go against our grain. I'm learning so much from being married to Toshi. She's so relational, drives me nuts. I'm not good at it. She is a host of all hostesses. She's a great host. She asked me, well, we're going to have this over at the house. And I'm like, why? Why they got to come to the house? Now, part of it is because it's just me. I'm not a good host. I'm a great host once I get there. But I'm a better host at somebody else's house. Because then I can leave the mess over there. My frustration is I don't want to have to clean up all my crap so when you come over you don't see my garbage. You know, she's all okay. You know, she's like, bring them all over and be okay. And I'm like, no! Holiday Inn! I'm just saying these things. Guys, this is what Jesus is demanding of us. Love your neighbor as yourself. To do that, that means I have to love God with all. It's two sides of the same coin. Who's my neighbor? It's not who's my neighbor. It's can I become neighborly? It's the change in our heart that has to occur. And that's the fulfillment of the gospel. Father, I thank you for each person here tonight. I pray, Lord, that something that was said or done tonight will encourage them, will help them, Father, will strengthen us to become more like you in all that we do. I thank you for it, Father, in Jesus' name.